My name is Patty Mulvihill. I'm LOC's Executive Director. Everybody should be familiar with the process now, but just a few quick reminders. Please make sure your microphone remains muted at all times unless you're asked to unmute yourself. If you've not yet done so, please identify yourself by your name and the city you represent. This is a public space, so all are welcome to attend and to listen in. We're also recording these so people can download them and watch them later. We do hold questions till the end, and we do our best to start taking questions from LOC members before members of the general public. You can always follow all LOC legislative activities on our website at www.orcities.org. For today's legislative webinar, we're going to specifically cover the following topics: broadband, the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission's potential increase in a surcharge, the Department of State Lands permit fees, some towing of recreational vehicles. We'll hear an update on a housing production work group, as well as another bill related to homelessness and housing. There'll be information on a photo radar bell, and we will discuss some forthcoming legislative deadlines. It's a pretty decent amount of stuff to cover today. We're going to start quickly at the top with an information session on some broadband activity. You should all be familiar with him, but Nolan Plesha, there's Nolan. Hi, Nolan. Nolan is our lobbyist who handles telecommunication, broadband, as well as our energy portfolio. He's talked a lot to this group before in the past about information related to broadband, but he does have some information to update you on that topic today. What do the members need to know on broadband this morning, Nolan?
Thank you. And yes, we are here again talking about broadband. Ideally, we would have this bill through by now, but it's been a tough process working this and trying to find a compromise with proponents. So House Bill 3201 was actually scheduled for a public hearing this week. It was actually scheduled for a public hearing yesterday in the Senate Committee on Veterans, Emergency Management, Federal, and World Affairs. However, the public hearing was actually rolled over to Tuesday, May 2nd, while possible amendment language is being finalized. Our ask today is that members contact their senators and ask them to support House Bill 3201A and encourage a quick passage through the Senate. You can find a link to all the senators on today's bulletin, along with additional talking points and information. Conversations have been going well on possible changes, but it's our belief that House Bill 3201A as is the best outcome for our members and their communities. We are also at the point in session where next Friday is the last day to schedule a work session for bills. And based on the pace of these conversations, we need to ensure that we are at a place where we can move this bill forward as soon as possible. If we do not, we are going to risk losing some of the federal funding from ARPA and BEAD. That is why we're really making a strong push for people to contact their senators and encourage them to support the bill as is. That gives us a lot of leverage to push these conversations forward and to get an amendment that will be favorable to the direction and for what we have already felt comfortable agreeing to in some compromised language. So again, our big ask is for members to either email or call their state senators and encourage them to support House Bill 3201A as is, and if they are willing to additionally sign on to the bill.
And Nolan, just in case there are people on this call or people like me who don't always do great with House bill numbers, can you briefly summarize what is in the bill that members should support, why we want them to support it as is? What does it do?
Yes, so just as a reminder, House Bill 3201 was the product of a broad working group that included LOC as well as frontline community leaders, as well as additional private providers and additional businesses. The main focus of this bill is to remove barriers in Oregon statute that are conflicting with federal guidance for the ARPA infrastructure broadband funding, as well as the broadband equity access and deployment funding, which totals up to about $700 million. Those potential conflicts can really impact our ability to spend this funding per federal guidance. And the state has essentially been put on notice that if there are conflicts that exist that inhibit our ability to spend how they would like to, that we just may not receive all this funding. And then lastly, I will just note that there are also strict timelines and how quickly we can spend this funding. We have till the end of 2026 to spend the ARPA funding. And once the state gets their final plan in for BEAD, we have 5 years to spend that funding, which is why it's critical to ensure our fund is flexible for both sources of funding because they are different. And so that we can quickly get this money out to communities and spending it where it needs to go in our unserved and underserved communities as quickly as possible so that we don't leave any money on the table.
Thanks, Nolan. And it's just important. I will reiterate for you. Support for House Bill 3201A as is. No additional amendments are helpful as far as you're concerned, correct?
Correct.
Perfect. Thank you, Nolan. And as Nolan said, he'll put that information on the chat for those of you who are interested in providing some grassroots efforts to help make sure that gets passed as a clean bill. We're going to pivot now to Scott Winkles. Scott should be familiar to all of you. He is our general government lobbyist. He handles a barrage of issues for us. Scott, I'm not seeing you randomly pop up on my screen yet, but you're here. There you are. Scott's going to give us an update today on a potential increase to the surcharge that's presently imposed by the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission, otherwise known as OLCC. Scott, what's happening at OLCC that the members need to be aware of?
So we have an interesting opportunity to increase shared revenue from derived from liquor sales. Currently the OLCC puts a 50-cent surcharge per 750 milliliters. So that's the standard fifth size bottle of liquor that goes out the door, and that 50 cents is deposited in the state general fund. The plan, what the OLCC is currently seeking public testimony and public comment on, is increasing that surcharge from 50 cents to $1. And what I'm asking the members, and we're asking the members to do, is submit comments, and in the bulletin there's a link to the article and the notice from the OLCC where they can do so, and ask that support the surcharge, but ask that they divert the funds away from, or they include all members of the shared revenue formula in the profits from that increase. So right now the OLCC makes an extra $40 million from the 50-cent surcharge. They want that to go up to $1. And what we're asking for is that the surcharge actually be shared through all parties who receive that shared revenue. So that cities receive most of that, then the counties, and then behavioral health and addiction services receives another part. And those are all, worthy recipients. We understand the state's got some challenges financially this session, but so do cities. And there was an agreement going back to 1933 on how this money is supposed to be distributed. And we're going to ask that the state hold to that. What makes this a little more pressing is that earlier decisions by the Liquor and Cannabis Commission changed things like the agent compensation, and the agents are essentially the store owners who facilitate the sale of the alcohol. They changed the way those agents were compensated, and we've all heard about the warehouse that cities will be experiencing reduced shared revenue from the repayment of the revenue bonds used to pay for the purchase and construction of the warehouse. So even though liquor sales are up by about 10 points, revenue to cities as of earlier this year were down about 3.8%. And we're asking that we get a piece of this action.
So Scott, are we asking for a piece of let's say the surcharge increase goes through, are we asking for a percentage of the full $1 or a percentage of the increased 50 cents?
We're asking for we're asking that the entire surcharge, so the existing and the add-on, that entire amount be put into the distribution, into the shared revenue formula. So it benefits all parties.
would we have a number yet ready on what we would be talking about for local government, or is it still too soon for that type of data?
The total is $80 million between the two is what the projection is between the existing and the add-on over the next biennium. And so we'd be it's higher math calculating that because there are two separate city formulas within there, but I can certainly put that out. But we would get about 22% of that 80 million ish.
Awesome. Thank you. And you'll put your information in the chat if people need more
Absolutely.
help. Excellent. Thanks,
Yep.
Scott.
Sure.
And then pivoting to a different type of money issue, we have an update for you on House Bill 2238, particularly the -A3 amendments to the enrolled bill. These deal with some permit fees coming out of the Department of State Lands. Ariel Nelson is our housing and land use lobbyist. I think, Ariel, you worked a little bit with Michael Martin, who does our environmental and natural resources stuff on this one, but Ariel popped on my screen first. So I'm going to ask Ariel to take the lead on giving us an update on these -A3 amendments and how they impact our members.
Thanks, Patty. Hi, everyone. So House Bill 2238 is a bill that has already passed the House. It's on the Senate side. When it was introduced in the House, it was introduced as a bill to allow the Department of State Lands to adopt rules or to establish their fees for renewal, removal, or fill permits for wetland mitigation and wetland delineation reports. General authorizations related to that. So currently their wetlands fees are in statute. So this bill would allow them to do it in rule through the rulemaking process. There was a lot of opposition on the House side and a lot of concern from the committee on the House side. So they ended up stripping that part of the bill out. And instead the bill that passed out of the House was about how the Department of State Lands provides notice for removing personal property found on Department of State Lands property, and how they keep it for 30 days, kind of similar to some of the requirements for local governments. So that's what moved forward. And then the bill was scheduled for a hearing and had a hearing this last week. And the night before the hearing, the governor's office posted new amendments putting the fees back in. And so there was no opposition lined up for the hearing because no one knew it was happening. The LOC has not weighed in formally on this bill because, frankly, we haven't heard from many of you that this was a major issue, although we do know there is at least an indirect impact on cities. These fees do impact the cost of any kind of development, whether it's housing development, so related to a city's housing goals. And certainly if a city is doing any kind of public contracting, any kind of improvements or projects, this would impact any fees related to that. So obviously this impacts some communities more than others, but wanted folks to be aware that this was moving forward. The part of the concern is that the agency, the Department of State Lands, has not updated their fees in a really long time. So they're really out of date. The agency is not currently paying for their programming. They're not solvent. And so they're, we, on one hand, government to government, we want this agency to be solvent, right? And to be able to pay for things. But I think we're concerned that what goes into rulemaking without a lot of public input, potentially, we could see a really large hike for them to get caught up on where their fees should be. So just wanted our membership to be aware. And I'm just asking that folks reach out either in the chat here today or by email if this is something that is of concern to your community, because I want to make sure that I can connect you with the appropriate legislators so that we can communicate the impact of this bill potentially on cities. And if it's not a huge impact, then we're not going to spend a lot of political capital on it. So just being frank, there are many, many bills moving forward.
Thanks, Ariel. Do you have a sense of how quickly you need to hear back from the members on whether they have concerns over this piece of legislation?
As soon as possible would be great. The record has closed, the public record has closed, but there's some time before they schedule this for a vote. So want to make sure that if I need to weigh in on behalf of the LLC with committee members, with legislators, I need to know sooner than later.
Okay, thank you, Ariel. And Michael, I saw you popped up. Do you have anything to add, or did Ariel cover it?
She did a great job. Yep. Thanks.
Okay, Perfect. So Ariel, don't go away. I have you for a few more of the updates coming out. Let's start with towing abandoned recreational vehicles. It's been a heavy concern for a lot of our members, I think particularly in portions of Central and Coastal Oregon. And you've talked before about House Bill 3556, but what can you tell us about the status of that bill right now and how it stands to help some of our members?
Thanks, Patty. So House Bill 3556 is related to disposal of abandoned RVs. The LOC has been part of a pretty broad stakeholder group, large stakeholder group for a number of months leading up to session and then into session. And then there was about a 2-month pause while we were waiting for bill language. And that came out late last week. And I think I shared an update on that and was excited to be able to go in and support a bill because we really, the priority for the league has really been we need a funding source because disposing of RVs is really expensive. There's not a market for, they don't have the same scrap value like a car might. And there's a lot of hazardous materials potentially that make dismantling and disposing of these really expensive, cost prohibitive. And there's a backlog around the state. Well, unfortunately, the -2 amendments that were put forward did not include the feedback from the work group, which included many partners, AOC, Metro, law enforcement, and that in fact the changes in the -2 really spent most of the bill focusing on the statute around notice time periods and included a bunch of language that would severely increase both costs and liability exposure for cities and local governments. So we, along with AOC, came and testified with concerns, but also in support for what we really hope can still move forward this session, which is setting up a fee system to fund a program at ODOT to reimburse these costs. So the LOC and AOC are working, and Metro are working with ODOT to talk about if we can work together on getting this program stood up and hopefully move a bill forward that does exactly that and just leaves alone the existing statute. There's definitely some things that could be clarified and improved, but there were a number of concerns raised by the housing advocates, homeless advocates in the Oregon Law Center. And so a lot of the provisions we saw in the -2 amendments were coming from their interests for their clients experiencing homelessness. So we're hoping to focus on the top priority, which is establishing this fund. So more to come on that, but wanted members to be aware. I know a number of you saw the -2s, shared concerns. Your technical feedback has been incredibly helpful. And I hope to have better news and more optimistic news next week that we're able to put forward the programmatic part of the bill.
Excellent. Thanks, Ariel. And we didn't announce it, but I do know that House Bill 33501 House Bill 3501 that you've talked about in the House, otherwise known as the Right to Housing Bill, has been making some press this week, and you've been fending off some feedback and questions from our members. And I thought I'd give you an opportunity to let everybody know where that Right to Rest bill stands from your perspective.
Yes. So House Bill 3501, there was a question about this last week because it is scheduled for a public hearing next week on the 4th in the House Housing Committee. It is a public hearing, but the bill is dead. It's still in the House committee where it was introduced, which means it didn't move forward by the first chamber deadline. So this bill has no path. This is what is known as a courtesy hearing. It is an opportunity for the proponents of the bill to share their story and to raise awareness for the bill and why they're bringing it forward. So the LOC will not be weighing in. We will be listening and learning, and we are not needing any formal testimony or input from cities at this point. Certainly, in any session, any bill can come back to life at any time, but we are not hearing from the leadership from the legislature that that's the case for this bill, that if they had wanted to move this concept forward, we would have seen it pass out of the committee by the deadline.
Thank you, Ariel. Not done yet. Continuing with housing and homelessness. You've talked before with us, and I know you've been working closely with the Housing Production Work Group, and I'm wondering if you can give us an update on where that stands.
Yes, as I think most of you know, the governor on her first day as part of her executive actions established a housing production advisory council. That group met 4 times, and there's a bulletin article this week where you can get a link to the council and the materials and who the membership is. Unfortunately, we don't have any local government representation on that council. We've had that conversation with the governor's office and remind folks of that whenever we can, but they are setting up, they have stood up 5 subject-specific work groups. The topics for those are land supply, one related to permits and process, one related to codes and design, and one related to workforce shortages. And then the final one is financing, both for subsidized affordable housing as well as market housing, related financing needs. And they are inviting subject matter experts to participate in those work groups. So in the bulletin article, and I've already put out kind of the alert to the city planning group, but we're looking for cities to volunteer. The time commitment, they're going to be meeting, they've already started, some of them already started to meet. They're going to be meeting, but mostly May into November, December, probably twice a month or every couple of weeks. We know not everyone will be able to do every meeting. So the goal is to kind of have a core group that can fill in for each other. I will be trying to track all the meetings in between, but would really love to have city planning experts, building code experts, public works, city managers. If you have this expertise, if you're working in housing financing, would love to have your expertise. And we really want to make sure that we have a good mix of both small and large cities, urban, rural, and of course, geographic representation from around the state. So please do reach out to me. There's a bulletin article. You can email me. You can send me a chat and make sure I'll get you on the list to be invited to participate and inform these conversations.
Thank you, Ariel. And this is our opportunity. Those subgroups are going to hopefully elevate voices and concepts to the main work group. Is that correct?
That's correct. They're looking to do 3 rounds of recommendations, and the full council will have at least a couple meetings with each recommendation. So it is a pretty dedicated process. The work groups are not going to be posted publicly and available to the public. So if you really want to be tracking those conversations, you need to let me know now so I can get you on the list. The full council are public meetings and anyone can watch and listen in.
Excellent. Thanks, Ariel. If you're interested in that, do please contact Ariel. It's important that we get local voices in on those recommendations. I didn't announce it at the top. That was on my fault. But if I could ask Lindsay Tennis. Lindsay is our tax and finance lobbyist. She's got some updates and reminders regarding ARPA funding that all of you would have received the last few years. So Lindsay, what can you tell us and remind us about deadlines and potential clawbacks still happening at the federal level?
Yeah, thank you, Patty. I'll start with following up on the clawback attempt that we raised on last week's call. If you weren't on last week's call, there was an attempt in the House by Speaker Kevin McCarthy last week to claw back unobligated ARPA funds. And we raised that as sort of a concern and an impetus to spend your ARPA funds as expeditiously as possible. We've gotten a little more guidance from NLC on what exactly that means. So in this most recent attempt, it doesn't have any material effect because the way that they were defining obligated funds in the bill, Treasury would have interpreted as any funds that have already left the federal coffers. So any funds that have been sent out from Treasury would have been counted as obligated under that specific language. So we would have all been in the clear because basically all the money has been sent out, right? It wouldn't affect ARPA funds that your city has already received. Not to say that they will not keep attempting to claw back unobligated ARPA funds, and they could change that definition however they wanted to pin it more on funds that haven't been spent by the recipient. I think, NLC believes in the makeup of this current Congress with a Democratic controlled Senate that those attempts would be unsuccessful. But ARPA funds have to be expended in full by 2026. So within that time frame, there's another election that could change the makeup of Congress. So it's still on our radar and definitely something to be aware of. That, as we know, in all levels of government, there can be a distrust of how local governments spend revenue. So we're still encouraging to spend the funds soon. And it's also kind of another reason why we're pushing so hard on the ARPA reporting compliance, is to show that local governments can be trusted with this revenue when it comes down from the federal government. And then on the ARPA reporting and compliance deadline, we've talked about this in last week's statewide call, and then also sent out a few bulletin articles. I think all of you are aware of the reporting deadline that is coming up in 2 days. I want to touch on some questions that I've gotten from multiple members over the last couple of weeks, in case anybody else is experiencing the same issues. So because all cities had to do this same deadline reporting last year, everyone has a login with Treasury, and Treasury wants you to use the same login again. Now, for some cities, there's staff turnover, right? So that login credential might leave with the person who leaves. I've heard this concern raised by a number of cities. If that is the case and you cannot get into the last login because you can't access the password, you're going to send an email to Treasury's help desk, and they can help you through that process. I know NLC has set up some tech search support to help cities through these last couple of days. I will drop that email in the chat, and it's in the bulletin as well. So if you have the record that you sent in that ticket to Treasury, print it out, keep it for your records, because that will count as a timely filing. If you are showing that you are trying to get into the system but can't, you've sent in the ticket, that will count as a timely filing. So print that record and keep it, especially for future reference. So a future city staff person could find it in the records and it doesn't get lost in technology turnover. Let me look at my other FAQs here. Another question that I got was about, do cities still need to complete the yearly filing if last year you reported your expenditures in full? And the answer is yes. That yearly reporting requirement goes through 2026, which is the deadline to expend funds in full. So even if you reported full expenditures last year, you'll need to fill out the report again and just zero everything out for new expenditures since you last filed a report. Let me see. I think that was everything, but let me just check my notes really quick here. Oh, and then the other thing I will say is that, if you send in your ticket help to Treasury before April 30th, and then they help you through the process, or for some reason you're able to figure it out over the next couple of days after the 30th deadline, you still want to complete your report even if it's late, especially because there is that reporting requirement every year through 2026. So Treasury is going to want your full record of reporting. So yeah, please still complete the report after April 30th, even if it's late. Send in your help ticket for the record, so that it can still be counted as timely filing.
Thanks, Lindsay. So April 30th is the deadline. And she said it at the top, but just again, if you are having questions or struggling and you can't figure out the Treasury information, Lindsay is doing her best to help provide guidance and field phone calls. So please do feel free to email Lindsay if you're struggling and the information from Treasury is not particularly helpful for you. Lindsay also did mention that we are keeping ARPA clawbacks on our radar. So it's important that you do utilize those funds you've been receiving. And since we did already talk about something being on our radar, we have some good information related to radar. Jim McCauley has an update on our photo radar bill. He's probably particularly excited about it because I think this accounts for about 4 years of his life. I'm trying to get this taken care of. But Jim, what good news can you tell us about House Bill 2095?
That is probably one of the better segues that I've heard in a while. So House Bill 2095, which is the photo radar bill, is heading to the governor's desk. So as Patty mentioned, it's been 4 sessions effectively. And we finally had a window this time around with a new mix of what the joint transportation committee looked like. So that's all good. And a lot of this credit, I will say, goes to our membership who took the opportunity to contact their legislators, rural areas, urban areas, and made the case for why this presents value for providing public safety tools in their communities. So that is, again, a great, I'll say, show of how grassroots can be effective in this. I think the other part of this is obviously persistence and patience pays off. And that's something that I think all of us who had a chance to work in the legislative process know is really important going forward. Typically, good stuff doesn't always get done in one session. It can sometimes take longer. So there's three pieces that House Bill 2095 provides. One is the authority to use fixed or photo or mobile photo radar in your communities. Number two is the use of mobile and fixed photo radar will be allowed on high-speed corridors. Currently, they're restricted only for high crash corridors. I think from our perspective, it didn't make any sense to get to a crash corridor before you could use these things. The idea is to prevent those crashes on the front end of it. And then the third piece here is cities have the ability to adjust their speeds on their streets and things of that nature right now, but it's only in a 5 mile per hour increment. We are upping that up to 10 miles per hour because there's been some jurisdictions out there that have gone through the process twice, and it seems kind of ridiculous for them to have to go through that twice when they can do it in one. You're still going to have to work through the same, I'll say, speed data work that needs to be done to determine whether or not you hit the targets that ODOT has got in front of them, but at least now you've got some more flexibility to use it. The other part of the conversation I wanted to make sure everybody knew was coming forward is we're almost through April. Obviously, May starts next week, and we are starting to hit the next round of deadlines. So Friday of next week, May 5th, effectively, if your bill does not have a work session scheduled in the second chamber, it is effectively dead unless that bill is sitting in a rules committee, revenue committee, ways and means, et cetera, et cetera. But all of the policy committees effectively have this as a shutdown. And that means that by May 19th, if that work session has not been held, that too is a deadline for when a bill goes away. So those are pretty important for us. And at that stage, it becomes kind of a scramble because May 17th is the final revenue forecast that the state will have in front of them. And from that point on, that's where a lot of the budget decisions end up getting made. And we'll be, I'll just say, kind of fast and furious to see what deadline we sign and die on. So the constitutional deadline is June 25th. The target sign and die deadline is June 15th. And in years past, or at least previous sessions, leadership has tried to hit that targeted sign and die date, which all of us are hoping for, because I don't think we want to spend another 10 days in the Capitol or trying to clean things up. So pretty accelerated schedule here coming up rather quickly. And you'll hear more about, again, our ongoing work because we're still not done. We've got a lot of pieces that need to come together between now and the end of the session.
And Jim, just as a reminder, about how many bills approximately would you still consider live at this point?
I think between both chambers, we're probably sitting somewhere in the neighborhood of around 400 to 500, roughly.
Okay. And we expect there to be heavy drop-offs on May 5th and May 19th.
I have my
Hopefully.
fingers crossed there will be heavy drop-offs.
And everybody on the call should also cross their fingers. Some universal goodwill sent to Salem. Yes.
Yes.
All right. We're going to pivot now to our question and answer phase. If you have questions, as always, you're welcome to raise your proverbial Zoom hand. You can also place them in the comment. This is a friendly reminder that this is an opportunity for people to ask questions, not to make comments or state their opinions. It's an opportunity for questions only. We do our best to take comments from LOC members ahead of members of the public first. That is because that is the representation that we serve. So if you have a question, raise your hand or put it in the chat. I will say, if you're putting questions in the chat, I am going to take housing questions first today when I see them come in. That is because Ariel Nelson has another meeting and needs to pivot away quickly. I do see, I think it's Councilor Paul Schaefer from the city of Corvallis has his hand raised. I did get the title right, didn't I?
You did.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Counselor, excellent. If you want to ask your question, we'll do our best to
And
get you answered.
yeah, this is a question for Ariel. House Bill 3414. I drafted a letter for our city council to send, and I had an exchange with Ariel earlier in the week by email, but our community development people said yesterday that things are happening, and so some of what's in my draft letter is already obsolete, apparently. I'm wondering if she could give me, or give all of us, an update on that bill and what I'm told is the -6 amendment.
Great question, Councilor. Thanks so much. So House Bill 3414, as a reminder for the group, is the governor's housing bill. It has two main parts. The first part requires cities to approve variances for any number of land use regulations for housing development. It's problematic for a number of reasons. It contradicts established state requirements and local code related to things like middle housing, requirements from the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis and Housing Production Strategies, requirements in climate-friendly equitable communities, rulemaking, and then any number of local code and requirements. The second part of the bill establishes a housing accountability and production office between DLCD and building codes. And they've told us it's intended to be like an ombudsman's office to work with the state and local governments on improving timelines and development and providing technical assistance. But as drafted in the bill, it's 10 pages of this office receiving complaints from developers about cities breaking the law, and then cities being investigated and held accountable. And so we're having a lot of ongoing conversations with the governor's office about this bill. It did receive a public hearing in the House Housing Committee. And I think that folks know there's a bit of opposition to it. The legislature does, and it's not just local governments. There was a group called the Willamette River Keepers, an environmental group, put out an action alert last week that the governor's office is now responding to. The bill was moved to the Rules Committee, which is a procedural move that keeps the bill alive during the session and gives more time. And it has not been scheduled for a public hearing yet, which means you can't actually, if there's not a scheduled date on the calendar on OLIS, you can't submit testimony on the record. You can always email the committee members or your own legislators about the bill. So that's always an option to you. But in terms of things happening, yes, there's a lot of conversations behind the scenes. The LOC is working on an amendment proposal that would would improve the variance portion of the bill. It would flip it such that right now the governor's office, the most current version as proposed by the governor is the -4 amendments that are online. That's what the hearing was on in the House committee. And it basically puts out a long and growing list of reasons why a city could deny a variance. But as we've communicated with the governor's office, shared with them, that the cities under this bill would still have to document findings and defend every time that they were denying for one of these reasons, which is an incredible amount of paperwork and staff capacity time when we know that planning staff are stretched thin. And we're hearing from the state, and everyone is trying to do their best to expedite and encourage development of housing. And so that would not help with that, right? So we're proposing, this gets wonky, but a flipped version of an adjustment where developers could request an administrative adjustment, like a proportional reduction of certain design development standards, but not a full excusal of those, and it would narrow the focus and narrow the impact on cities. So that is what we've been negotiating with the governor's office in multiple meetings. We've got a group of city planners that meets weekly that have been informing this conversation. We understand that the governor will be coming forward with -6 amendments. Those are not drafted yet. Those are not out yet. So that'll probably be about a week out that we see those. And so we may see a public hearing in a week or two, but everything is kind of day by day. The governor's office has not taken our proposal off the table. They're still considering it. So we're really appreciative that Representative Gamba is working with us on our proposed amendments. And we are lobbying behind the scenes right now on that proposal. So if you want all the details of that, I'm happy to give it to you. We will have a one-pager in more plain language about our amendments in the proposal next week. And I'm happy to share that with folks when I have it. Feel free to shoot me an email and I'll make sure that you get it when it's ready. I think Jason from the planning department in Corvallis is on my regular call, and so he'll get it as well. And I just encourage you all to work with your planning experts to better understand what this bill means, because it is really technical.
Thank you, Ariel. And I hope that answered your question, Counselor.
As far as it can be answered right now. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. We'll wait and see. And as soon as we have more, we'll update it. I'm not seeing anybody else with their hand raised or questions in the chat. I'll give you all a few minutes. While I do want to give everybody a heads up that the next 2 Fridays, Friday, May 5th and Friday, May 12th, our webinar is going to start at 1:30 p.m., not the standard noon time. That late start is to allow for the LOC president and Hillsborough Mayor Steve Calloway to host regional meetings in the North Coast and in the Mid-Willamette Valley. So if you're somebody who has these meetings locked in on your calendar, please make sure that you make an adjustment on the start time for the next 2 Fridays. May 5th and May 12th will start at 1:30. Additionally, if those of you out there are looking for some training on urban renewal programs later this week, I'm sorry, I've lost track of time with our spring conference. Next week on May 4th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., we will have a virtual training on urban renewal agencies. We are still taking registrations. If you're interested, you can find that on the LOC's website under our training tab. Additionally, for those of you that are on the North Coast or in the metro region who are interested in traveling up a little bit to the North Coast, on Friday, May 5th, President Steve Calloway will be hosting a regional meeting in Rainier. You're welcome to attend. We do ask for pre-registration so that we can make sure we order enough lunches. Lindsay did touch on this, but it is important to the LOC that we keep drilling at home. Your ARPA filing deadlines are April 30th. So you have less than 2 days to get your deadline met. So please make sure you do that. And not seeing any more hands raised or questions in the chat, we will give you 19 minutes left of your Friday afternoon window spot. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the sunshine. If you're like me, avoid the heat, and we will see you all next week. Thank you.